Welcome to another episode of the Physician Growth Accelerator, a show where we break down your medical practice systems into vitals, give you the tools to diagnose root cause of what may be restricting your growth, and prescribe what to do about it. I'm your host, Zed Williamson, and I believe that every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets. That means everything that everyone ever experiences is the perfect outcome of the system that created it. Now, sometimes when I say that in person, you see someone go, that makes sense, and they don't like that it makes sense. It's a logic that is also frustrating because there's likely things about the business side of your medical practice that may be frustrating you. And it's not these gigantic barriers that are just destroying you and putting you in tremendous risk. It's just that feeling that maybe you're not super excited to be at the office Monday morning. Or maybe you feel like you don't really know where the practice is headed from a goal standpoint. Maybe you don't know what an exit strategy would be. And the reason that can feel logical, the idea that every system is perfectly designed to get the result it gets, at the same time as sounding frustrating, is because our brain is actually designed to survive in a world that doesn't exist anymore. And the way it did that was avoid risk, and it would search for comfort. And so when we experience things, our brain naturally wants to put the blame on the outside. He wants to say, well, I don't like this, but it's because of things that I'm not in control of, because that's a little bit more comfortable. That's bias taking over. That is a brain that is trying to conserve energy. It's trying to, recognize patterns and say, well, that just is the way it is, and you can't worry about that. There's nothing I can do. That's the way it is now. It's not true. A more evolved way of thinking is taking a step back and saying, okay, maybe I don't like this specific outcome. It is the perfect outcome of the current system. So instead of trying to fix the outcome, which we always do as business owners, I've done it hundreds of times. I get frustrated with something and I go, we need to fix this. And then it fixes and you go, ooh, okay, cool. And then it veers off course again. Fix, veers off course. Fix, veers off course. And that's because we're not addressing the system. And I'm going to assume, if you're listening to this podcast, that you're probably feeling some constraints within your medical practice. This is the Physician Growth Accelerator, and I don't want that to get mixed up with, hey, here's how you get busier. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about growth as it relates to the business health of your practice, putting you in a position where you are always in the driver's seat. Whatever you want to do and achieve, you're in control because you're realizing you've taken that step back and you look at your system and you go, oh, okay, here's the piece that created this outcome I didn't really like. Now I can tweak it. And that's the mindset around the Physician Growth Accelerator. And if you're wondering, do you have vitals that are off track that may be creating constraint in your practice, you can go to physiciangrowthaccelerator.com and check your vitals. And you'll probably start to notice, you know what? That is something that is a little bit frustrating. Again, it's probably not putting your business at tremendous risk. That's not what I'm talking about. It's just that thing, that ache in your gut where you just wish this part was a little bit easier, a little bit better, a little bit more efficient. That's what the Physician Growth Accelerator identifies. Now, many physicians I've talked to in the last couple of months have mentioned that they're getting outreach, calls, emails from private equity groups. And they don't know what to think about it. Now, I will say that I am not a big fan of blanket statements, things like all private equity is bad or all private equity is good. I don't believe either of those things. I don't have an opinion if you want to sell your practice to a hospital system, to a private equity group, to never selling it at all and just creating a moat around your business. That is for you to decide based on your goals of what's important to you long term. What I believe is there are certain things that works for people and certain things that don't work for people. And I do believe that if you have a strong, healthy business side of your practice, you will always be in the position to make that decision that's best for you. And so just as a system, I want you to imagine a medical practice that got called by a private equity group, and they got excited and they decided to sell. Now, why would the private equity group buy a medical practice? Well, if it's a small practice, maybe one or two providers, one or two locations, that private equity group is likely seeing it as an opportunity to bolt on to something bigger, to instantly grow the size of the entire platform. And they know that when they bring some efficiencies to that practice, the value of that practice grows. Now, the efficiencies that they bring to the practice, they're not magic, right? They're not waving a magic wand and instantly things are better. They're doing things tried and true, year after year, practice after practice, that likely creates a different outcome. And so the private equity group benefits a lot from buying a practice like that. And many times, someone in that practice has this inside view of their organization, and they're not aware of the small changes that can really impact the business. I'm going to walk you through an example, and if you aren't watching right now, don't worry, I'll talk you through it. But on the screen, I'm showing an example diagnostic report. Don't worry, I've removed the client name, so even if you zoom in, you're not going to see anything specific. But there's this section of off-track metrics. We have a reference range of where we believe things should be based on, a decade of working with private medical practices. And I just want to walk you through the reality of what these things mean in a system. So imagine two medical practices. They're the exact same. And they both have unused new patient capacity. So the opportunity to see more new patients that they would like to see. And they both have websites. But one practice has 40% of their local traffic on their website, and the other practice has 80%. Okay, you already can start to feel the difference. This is an off-track metric of this practice that we work with. The conversion, meaning someone going to the website and saying, you know what, I trust these people. It seems like they can help me with what I deal with, so I'm going to reach out to them. That conversion percentage. Imagine if one was 6% and one was 12%. So you can already see the difference in these two practices with these things that you probably have no idea about as a measurement within your business. A private equity group would dive into that because it's actually pretty easy to do. Now, what if someone reaches out to your practice and one practice misses 40% of their phone calls and one practice misses 20% of their phone calls? So you can start seeing how these things come together as a system. It's not one thing. It is never just one thing. It's the mistake that our brains make that when you flip a light switch, it actually just makes the light come on. There's a lot of things that happen between that light switch and the ability for light to be in the room. The same thing with business. So this practice that has double the local traffic on their website, they have double the conversions of people who go to the website trusting the practice to help them, and they answer twice as many of the calls of patients looking for a new appointment. What's the outcome? It's pretty easy to see. A little trick that I like to play on myself is how could I create failure? If I wanted to design a practice that had open new patient capacity, like barely any new patients at all, what would I start to do? Well, I'd make it almost impossible for a patient to find the practice. If they ever found the website, I'd want the patient to feel uncomfortable reaching out to the practice. And if they did, I want to make sure that no one ever answered the phone. I know this sounds ridiculous, but you can see that you can create the negative outcome on purpose. And if we can create a negative outcome on purpose, then what can we also do? Create the positive outcome. So this is just one example. If you are being courted by private equity, and you've decided that it's a good idea for you, that's great. Make sure that you interview them, you treat it like a marriage. You're going to be joined at the hip for years and years and years, and you want to love the idea of working with this group no matter what happens. If you don't like the idea, but you feel like you need to, like maybe there's this feeling of, well, if I don't do this, am I in trouble? Or if I don't sell to the hospital system, am I in a bad place? Or, man, costs keep going up, reimbursements keep going down. If I don't do this, am I at risk? And the answer is no, because they are not magic. They're not doing anything that can't be done by you. What it takes is analyzing the system. Because if you took two practices and one was amazingly successful, had just a brilliant business foundation that put them in a position to always be in the driver's seat, to always be in the position where they never felt they had to do anything. That's just a perfect outcome of their system. And that is very doable for any medical practice out there. It takes looking at the system. Now, let's say it's a much bigger practice that private equity is talking to. And you might hear these words like the platform practice. So the private equity group would like to buy a big practice because they see it as the anchor, as the reason to get other little practices to join. That practice is probably going to benefit the most from joining private equity. And it still has to be a purposeful decision made by you as the business owner, not because you feel like you have to, but because you feel they bring something to the table that will help you do something you weren't able to do before. In that case, it might be, there'd be value in investing significant dollars in growth of the practice, and you just don't want to take on that risk. That's a perfect example of why it may make sense. What you also want to do in that case is to have the metrics to know that you may just want to do it yourself because it's not that risky. I would say 99% of the practices we work with have one thing set up in a way that makes it hard for them to make business decisions. And you're not going to like it because it's finance, and a lot of people don't like talking finance, but it's simply the structure of their income statement. If your income statement has one line at the top with all of your revenue, and then just a list of expenses with one line at the bottom is what the net profit is, you are blind to decision making. How is that possible? Well, we recently did a webinar about this, and we got a lot of feedback and questions, and this is so important. There are things that exist in your practice that allow you to do work with patients. This could be medical assistants. This could be APPs, additional physicians, whatever it is that allows you to see and treat patients. And the biggest mistake we see with income statements and how they're structured is all those things as related to cost are put as expenses in the business. Now, why does that matter? Because you'll never know when you need to hire someone or when you have too much capacity. And so a simple thing to do on your income statement, if you get with your accountant, they'll understand. They're likely creating your income statement purely for the purpose of taxes, which is good. You want that. But to actually run the business, you need decisions. You need to be able to identify what is the capacity of my practice and where am I with what I'm spending money on to be able to treat patients. And that's called moving those things above the line into something called cost of goods sold. And so it might sound strange, but you want direct labor as a cost of goods sold. That means if you have a physician as an employee, you do not want their salary in expenses. You want it as a cost of goods sold because now you can see what the production of that person is related to their specific salary. Any kind of cost for medical devices, that is cost of goods sold. You're only using that to treat a patient. If MAs are a big part of your practice and they allow providers to see more patients or they're rooming patients, you want that as an indirect labor cost. They are there to increase capacity to be able to treat patients. The things that should be as expenses are, the electric bill, if you have an office manager, all the stuff that you have to pay for all the time, no matter what. This simple change to your income statement brings so much opportunity to make decisions because now you understand, okay, I was a little bit worried about investing in my practice, but now that I've set these things up, I'm seeing that all of my cost of goods sold are maxed out, meaning I can't see more patients unless we invest in another location or another provider. And now you can very confidently go make that decision knowing that you'll be able to fill that capacity. It also keeps you from making the mistake of adding capacity when you don't need it. We've seen that before where someone feels like the revenue of their practice is stale. They've hit a plateau. And so what they do is they go, we need to hire this person or we need to open a location. And it wasn't the constraint. So all they did was add cost to the practice and no ability to actually treat more patients. And it's just amazing what pops up when you do these diagnostics within a practice. Another quick example is someone was frustrated because they were going after a new patient type and they had hired people to be able to see and treat that patient. And they saw zero growth. They actually saw their numbers go down. But diving into the practice, they had tremendous issues at the front desk. So their front desk was completely maxed out. It was impossible for the practice to take on additional patients to be able to utilize the new capacity created. And I know this can sound confusing, like there's a lot of moving parts, but it's simply a system and everything is connected. And if we look at it from that standpoint, you can step back and design the system that's going to create the outcome you want. And then now you are in the driver's seat. So if you do want to have an exit strategy that involves selling, now you're a better business to sell, which means you're going to get more value. You are in the negotiation at the power place as opposed to the private equity group or the hospital system or whatever. That's where we see that freedom really comes in. When you're in this position, there's never this have to. I'm not a big fan of that term. We should never say, I have to. It should be a decision, and it should be based on what is best for your business, your family, your team, so that you are purposely taking these steps forward. I hope that helped you out. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And if you want to check your vitals, visit physiciangrowthaccelerator.com and click Check Your Vitals. And we'll see you next time on the Physician Growth Accelerator.